Thanks for sitting in. How many in this group are founders, CEOs, C-level execs of small early stage companies? All right, terrific. How many have heard of SRI? Just a few? Okay, well, I'll try to give you a 10-minute lesson on SRI. The title of my little presentation here for about 10 minutes is Breakthrough Innovations, the story of SRI, which is a 70-year-old company based in Silicon Valley. And then Derek and I will have some time to chat a little bit about innovation. SRI was founded by Stanford University 70 years ago, 1946. It spun out of Stanford in 1970. Originally, it was called the Stanford Research Institute. You'll note that we were founded around the same time as Hewlett-Packard was founded, I think 2 or 3 years later, and we became independent, but quite a bit later, and have stayed independent since that time. We now do about $450 million worth of innovation-based technology transfer into industry, into government, and into other organizations. And of course, we're only located a couple of miles from Stanford, where we have a beautiful campus of about 63 acres. Happy to have anybody stop by, any of you stop by, just let me know. Our mission has been virtually the same ever since the trustees of Stanford are good enough to put us together under Stanford Research Institute, and that is to apply basic research for the good of society and for the marketplace. We've updated that to mean, more recently, creating world-changing solutions to make the world a much better place, safer, healthier, better educated, and more productive. Now, some of you may not have heard of SRI, but you certainly use and have been using SRI technology for quite some time. We created the computer mouse 50 years ago, but have done so much more since that time. Siri, how many of you knew Siri came out of SRI, from a $150 million 5-year artificial intelligence contract with our government. The first internet connection, managing domain names, the .org, .com domain names, the term SWOT, strength, weakness, opportunity, threats, color and HDTV technologies, ultrasound you'll see represented here, the first telerobotic surgical device, now called the Da Vinci. The company's name is Intuitive Surgical, and you can check to see how many billions of dollars that company is worth today. The first drug for malaria, of course, but also drugs for cancer and for infectious diseases. And yes, we even helped Walt Disney establish Anaheim as his first Disneyland location. Now, I tell a poor joke that no one laughs at. You'll be the first audience that we do everything from the computer mouse to Mickey Mouse. Thank you for a little bit of giggling there. I know you're still awake. So how do we come up with so many innovations? Well, we figured things out that there's an important sweet spot that has served us quite well. It's a sweet spot between research that's being done mainly by universities, national labs, corporate research centers worldwide, of course in the US, but in many other countries. And then over on the other side, you have Global 2000 companies, SMEs, new ventures. They're all hungry for new products, for new services, increasingly so. But unfortunately, only 1% to 3% of the IP on a global scale gets through that valley of death out into industry. This is where we live, right in that valley of death. And we've been doing this for quite some time. We feel our competitive advantage is to bridge the basic research that our own labs do, but we may use research from other labs and combine with partnerships from other universities and other national labs to bring basic research alive into the marketplace through the missions that we have. In fact, our own metrics indicate that our successes are about 9 times as much as the average research institute. So we feel like we're quite successful in getting that basic research out to be used by people like you, businesses, and people of the world. So our business model, as all of you are working or have worked on your business models, our business model is pretty simplistic. We do contract work for our US government. You see some agencies listed here like DARPA, the Department of Energy, NASA, the NSF, Department of Education, NIH, and we create IP along the way. Now, importantly, the IP that we create is owned by us. The government actually allows us to own the IP, and we license it back to the government for their particular use. It could be in drugs or in education or something along those lines. We then, in turn, make that IP and create new products, new services. We work on projects with large companies. We license our technology. And of course, we create ventures. We create 6 to 10 new ventures per year, like Siri, like some of the ones that you saw previously, that go on to be quite successful and either do IPOs or get acquired by other larger companies. Now, our first bias is to create new ventures. So you see the companies up on the top, and those are ones that have already exited. Some have done IPOs. Some, you see Google's name, you see Salesforce.com, you see Chan Zuckerberg initiative, fairly large, well-known companies who, after we've established a new venture and worked with VCs, generally in Silicon Valley, but increasingly throughout the world, could be one of your ventures that we combine with, then gets acquired by a larger entity. We also have a number of active new ventures. And let me just list and talk about a few of them on this page. So we have LEO Labs, which tracks all of the satellites and debris in the lower Earth orbit. LEO actually stands for that, lower Earth orbit. There's a lot of actually garbage and debris along with satellites in increasing amount. And this company sells its services to governments of the world and to companies. Abundant Robotics, next to LEO, is a family of small fruit and vegetable pickers. And these are smart fruit and vegetable pickers. They actually have some very good AI and detection to make sure that the fruit that they're picking is actually ripe and will bypass any fruit that is not ripe. Princeton Identity was formed with Samsung. It was a joint venture that turned into a new venture to focus on biometrics. And the first product is an incredibly accurate iris detection technology that's used in the Galaxy line. So it's actually much more accurate than fingerprint detection. Grabit is a robotic manufacturing technology for soft goods like shirts, dresses, and trousers. It actually can fold those up. And Casisto is a natural language-based platform for mobile banking. My favorite on here is Seismic, which is a special technology-based fashion wear and normal wear clothing for those in need of assistance getting around or doing heavy manual activities, like the elderly or kids with muscular dystrophy or athletes or construction workers. There's a lot of technology, both hardware and software, in the clothes that people will wear eventually to allow them to get around, so they actually won't need a real big robot. That robotic technology will be inherent in the fashion wear itself. All of these are in their B rounds or better in financing, and we incubated them at SRI. Of course, we team up with large and medium-sized organizations. You can see some of the names we work with here. Generally, they're companies that really appreciate technology. A lot of our technology or innovation is around technology. I don't know that I have time to show this. I'll show just a quick image of this. If we can get this going. Yeah. No. Well, there's a video, but the video won't show. So you'll have to go to Yamaha, SRI, and MotoBot. So MotoBot is an autonomous robot that we put on top of a Yamaha bike. Only took us 7 months to do it. And that bike moved around a track at over 200 kilometers per hour autonomously. And what we're doing there is not just trying to prove how fast we could go, but we're really trying to work with Yamaha to make bikes in the future much safer as congestion, urbanization takes place, and more people are using motorcycles to get around, to get to their jobs, to get to their various activities that they're doing. And we want to keep the death rate lower, not higher. I want to finalize here on why, and summarize why we've become so famous in the world for our innovations. There's really 4 distinctive attributes that I would point to. The first is, of course, integrated business models. I've shown you from basic research all the way through to commercialization. The second is multidisciplinary scale. I didn't mention, but we have well over 30 labs at our 20 locations throughout the world. And of the 1,800 employees, we have quite a few, in fact, over 50% have PhDs and master's degrees in many, many different disciplines. So we not only have the breadth, but we also have the depth to be able to scale and work on the toughest problems. The third attribute is our not-for-profit status. Since we're not-for-profit, we're really in for impact, not for our measure of dollar value. So we don't have to be grungy about dollars. Of course, I say that we're not-for-profit, but my second joke, which is sort of half joke, is that we're also not for loss. We have to pay our people. We're a competitive employer in the Valley, and we got to make sure that we take care of the bright talent that we have. But we're in it for impact and influence and positive as our mission is. And finally, we're independent. We don't have a corporate name in front of us. So there's no Microsoft or IBM or any other name like that in front of us. It's simply SRI, and we expect to be around for another 70 years. That, in 10 minutes or so, is a snapshot of how we have stayed in business through all the different technology cycles and so on of the world that has transformed the world. In the rock and roll version of Silicon Valley, we still say very, very relevant. Thanks, and I think Derek's going to join me here and ask me some questions. Let me get my water.
Thank you for that.
Thanks, Derek.
Steve, could you tell us a little bit about the way that SRI and Disney got connected and what you all actually did? It's something that actually I was never aware of. I don't think you all have gotten a tremendous amount of credit for it, or maybe you have, and I just never heard. But how did you all get involved? You actually worked with, not you personally.
Thank you.
You would have been a child at that time, probably. Walt Disney actually worked with SRI in selecting the location. Is that right? Of the original Walt Disney.
Correct.
World in Walt
Anaheim.
Disney.
Yeah,
in Anaheim, Disneyland.
Yeah, so we have had for quite some time, in addition to our innovations, strong technology, we've also had an economic development organization. And more governments of the world, companies, are quite interested in understanding how they can bring innovation and a bigger economy to the area. In fact, just backstage here, I was talking to some folks from some other countries in Central Europe who are quite interested in that. We still do that quite a bit worldwide, and we also do it locally in the States. So in various areas, in New York, in Ohio, other regions we've worked with, and we worked with Disney a while back to figure out where to put Disneyland.
Yeah, and they selected the location
We recommended Anaheim. We have great pictures of ourselves with Walt Disney, and they selected Anaheim, and the rest is history.
Clayton Christensen, who's a professor at Harvard and an author, talks about the disruption, the innovator's dilemma, which is that that as companies get bigger and more mature, that they just will get disrupted by people that come in, find new industries, lower margin at first, and then work their way up the chain. And I think to be able to, for 70 years, to continue to innovate is maybe it's one of the only companies in the world. There's a handful of them, but companies don't barely last 10 years, let alone 70 years or 50, more than 50 years. What do you think has, through the cycles of people, through the cycles of different types of technology, what has kept SRI continuing to develop interesting things year in and year out?
So a couple of things. First, people talk about culture in companies and how the founders out here have to establish a culture. Right from the beginning, the culture at SRI was established by Stanford University about really pushing the envelope on applying basic research and technology and science to the problems of the world. So the early employees all were active in that and really enjoyed doing that. And that has carried all the way through with our independence. Secondly, you know, we don't have, like many companies have, legacy or an installed base. We do 500 major projects per year, and we're only as good as our last project. So many companies, and all the companies here, would wish that they had a lot of installed base of products and service where they can take care of their customers. And that's all great because that can provide revenue for them, but they also have to take care of legacy technology. We don't have to do that. We can always keep creating.
This business model, did I understand this right? That basically the government pays you to do a project to develop IP, which I would assume they pay quite a bit of money to do that, and then once you develop the IP, they give you the IP to then sell and to license out. Did I understand that correctly?
You did. So
they're like, the government's like your VC that doesn't take equity. Is that?
Well, the VC, you know, so the government, we actually, we have very few grants.
Yeah.
The government doesn't give us money. We actually have to compete against the best companies in the US,
sure, sometimes
in the world, for these contracts. If we win a contract, as we did with the AI $150 million 5-year program I mentioned that DARPA put out, if we win that project, then we're due to give the government various reports and then license whatever we come up with back to the government for their particular use.
Yeah.
We then, in turn, since we own the IP, and that was through a congressional act called the Bayh-Dole Act, in Congress many years ago, we are then encouraged by our government to commercialize that. The government actually wins, and the people of the United States and the world win in 2 different ways. One, they get to license some real, but secondly, the ROI to government that they can tell the taxpayers of the US is that that technology is now being repurposed and reused, as is Siri. Siri came out of that AI project. Casisto came out of that AI project as well, the mobile banking application that I showed up there. All came out of that AI project and is that now being used widely.
What's the sales commission on a $150 million deal?
Actually, not very much. The government, so the good news is the government will pay your costs. The bad news is they won't pay you a profit. So you're going to have to eke out a profit your own way.
Yeah.
Well, we had 28 different partners. That was the best AI talent at the time in the US. We had labs from Stanford, USC, Oregon State, Harvard, and so on.
You talked about that, so if I'm at a big company and I'm having a hard time pushing through innovation, I mean, I see this and I think, you know, I may just throw up my hands because I'm like, I'm trying to get something small that's innovative through. And again, as you said, you don't have an install base, so you're sort of always looking for the next thing. But like, if I, you know, what do you think, what lessons do you all have that if I'm in a big company or maybe I'm in a bigger startup where I'm just trying to push the next thing through, what lessons can I take from you guys of like, to get through the valley of death and to really push through something that I think is going to be innovative in 4 or 5 years, but you know, it's very hard to get people to think that far out and buy in?
Well, ironically, even though we're a $450 million company, we relate a lot to the founders and CEOs, executives of these smaller companies who are trying to do the same thing. I think that may be your point, Derek. When we're trying to work for the first time with a Fortune 500 company or Global 2000 company, they generally have their own research and development area, they have their own business practices and so forth. So we find that there's a lot of protectionism in that company to try to keep things as they are. So the higher we go in the company and the more we talk to the C-level or a business leader in terms of making decisions on what we can do, And the Yamaha case is a great example of getting something done the Yamaha oven by itself and many of the companies up on that screen could not do. I suspect that the smaller companies here can do the same thing. Prove out why your technology or your business model or whatever it is, your service that you're selling, your product that you're selling is far superior, 10 times, 100 times more superior than what they've currently got.
When you actually, you're doing 500 projects a year, when you have a project that you're sort of getting to the end of, how do you actually determine if it's groundbreaking or not? How do you determine if it's Siri or if it's the thing that we've never heard of?
Well, we have different milestones along the way. Some of these projects that I named up there and the companies that I named them with, are multi-year projects. The one with Samsung where we did the Princeton Identity Iris on the Move technologies, as it's called, is has taken quite some time in the labs. It took us several years before we popped it out as a startup, and it's just now starting to flourish a couple of years after it was spun out. So people are pretty patient. They're used to, fortunately now, corporate venture capital is a big area, so they understand.
And how big are the teams? Not the $150 million contracts, but generally speaking, do you have like the optimal size for a team to actually get a project shipped?
Yeah, we typically have teams of anywhere from 5 to 20, 25 people. They're smallish teams. We really like the teams that call from sort of Mission Impossible, where you take resumes of scientists from maybe 4 or 5 different labs to be able to work together. If you take a look at that MotoBot on the Yamaha bike, there are 5 different labs involved. Software, hardware, robotics, AI, big data collection, analytics, etc. So we had quite a few people who like working together, unlike universities, who like working together across pollination, if you will, and getting technology out.
Interestingly, you talk about how your nonprofit status is a big help to you. I think what I've seen is a lot of companies going away from nonprofit. We've had, the UN's talked a lot about impact companies, mission-driven, for-profit companies that actually, do something good in the world. But if SRI was starting today, or if you were starting a company today, would it be a nonprofit, or is that just the nature of the contracts that you have, the customers you have, that that's the best model for this kind of business?
It still is, and the reasons are what you referred to a little bit earlier. Is if we were a for-profit, then we would not be able to hold on to the IP that we actually create on behalf of the government. As a not-for-profit, our not-for-profit status allows us to hold on to that. But on top of that, we're encouraged to commercialize. So the way that our revenue stream and our profits work is the more that we can do ventures or license our technology or do projects with commercial entities, then we get cash flow back when there's an IPO or a major sale of a technology or of a company.
When you're talking to a company, do companies mostly approach you? I mean, at this point, your portfolio is just insane. So do most people come to you, or do you still go to companies and say, hey, we think we could do this with you if that's something you want to be part of?
Well, it actually works both ways. One way it works is that we have a small group internally who's taking a look at different industries. For example, a couple of industries that we're quite interested in is the construction industry, and I referred to the agricultural industry. These two industries have not gone through major productivity increases in the past 25 or 30 years, and they're ripe for those kinds of changes through technology. So those are targets for us, and of course when we call upon those companies, they're eager to talk to us in those industries because they know that things are happening. They're seeing that half of the Fortune 500 has been wiped out and so on. But companies come to us all the time because they hear about us. They've hit a snag where their growth is not what it ought to be, or the technology has been exceeded by competition, and they need a hand.
And those industries were identified how?
How the industries were identified?
Those two industries, the new things that you're saying, hey, these...
By our market research group. So we have a market research group that while we interact with a lot of venture capitalists, of course, to stay in touch, a lot of the analysts, both on Wall Street as well as the industry analysts, and we try to stay on top of industries that are ripe for major changes taking place.
I think you've got 1,800 employees, is that
do.
right? How many of them are in Silicon Valley and how many are outside of Silicon Valley?
We have about 1,000 in Silicon Valley, and the other 800 are in our 19 other labs scattered generally around the US.
As you look at the talent that comes from those pools in different places, you look at other countries, what do you see in terms of what's happened in Silicon Valley over the last 50 years with the history of the company versus what's now happening outside of it?
Yeah, so we're continuing to emphasize growth outside the valley. We like what we have in Silicon Valley, but of course, as we all know, it's incredibly expensive. And so we generally have our labs near major research universities, Ann Arbor, as an example, or Princeton, or in Washington, D.C. itself, and we'll be adding more and more there. What I see on the horizon for us over the next, say, 5 to 10 years is we'll be adding research labs internationally. We've been doing business in Japan for quite some time. It's high time that we do something like that there, but there'll be other labs, other areas as well that have been countries that have been eager to bring us into their countries.
And is there any way for small companies or startups to actually work with you all, or is it really just the big companies that can partner with you?
No, we partner up with, it's been a new program for us the last couple of years, where we partner up and accelerate small companies that are already VC funded and need technology. Of course, we're quite selective about those. They really need to have a number of categories we probably can't go into now, or attributes, but we really like partnering up with companies in addition to incubating our own.
Yeah, and when a company spins out, like Siri, when it says, do you take a set percentage? Is it based on the investment, or is that public how much you take, or how does that work?
It's not public, but we take we're effectively like a Siri that spins out. We're effectively like a co-founder.
Yeah.
In a sense, a minority co-founder.
Yeah.
So the good news is any entrepreneurs out there are interested. I mentioned that we have 1,800 people in our company. Most of those folks are technologists, they're scientists, they're researchers, they're entrepreneurial, but they are not entrepreneurs. So they're not business people. So we're always looking for business people to combine with our technical folks to create another Siri, or another intuitive surgical, or another nuance, or somebody like that.
And when the technology spins out, the technical talent goes with that, or some piece of that, or?
Not as much as you would think. People who are at SRI really like to be at SRI. They're not really product people. Once you spin out and go part of a startup, you now have to create a product. That's revision control and a lot of disciplines that researchers don't like. They like to create and create and create. So most people like to stay at SRI.
You're a professor of entrepreneurship at Stanford.
I am.
And you've done that for how long?
About 9 years.
Actually, I became an entrepreneur 9 years ago. So what's changed since 2009 to today? I mean, what do you see with students coming in? I mean, Stanford's really like, I was just thinking about the Snapchat book I was reading. It talks a lot about Stanford, the founding of Snapchat. Like Stanford's always been entrepreneurial, but it's really shifted hard almost across every discipline, right?
Yeah, so Stanford, the business school, the graduate school of business, is well known for entrepreneurship. About 35% of the students, over 1/3 of the students, either start companies or VC firms or join them once they graduate from the business school. I used to teach 9 years ago on straight, just Main Street type entrepreneurial studies and venture capital. The last few years, thanks to a study that we did for the World Economic Forum that I worked on with one of the profs there, we did a study around entrepreneurial ecosystems of the world, and 40% of the GSB, of the Graduate School of Business, comes from outside the US. So I've started up some courses, started off as one, now 3 courses, quite popular, for those students who want to go back to their home countries in Africa and Latin America, the Mideast, Southeast Asia, Central Europe, where they don't have money, they don't have talent, they don't have advisors or board members, they don't have relationships with large companies, and they want to figure out how to do it right.
Yeah.
And we provide them with case studies that can help them.
Any of that available online, or is anyone here? Do I need to get into Stanford to
No.
see any of this? Or?
I'm happy to send a lot of information, case studies, and the curriculum to anyone who hits sjc21@stanford.edu.
Thank you so much. All right, Steve, President of
Thank you,
SRI
Derek.
International. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Thank you.